Video games taught me how to think. Not school, not my elders, video games. This is a consequence of growing up with undiagnosed ADHD and autism, which made traditional forms of education almost completely ineffective for yours truly. Though I got good grades in almost everything that I did, this was a consequence of memorizing everything for tests and then forgetting everything afterward, which is not the same as learning and does not foster independent thought. Eventually, I realized that if I wanted to be truly educated and learn to think for myself, I had to actually be interested in what I was studying. And the one thing I always had a reliable interest in was video games. The first time I felt a sense of philosophical aspiration was when I played Metal Gear Solid 2 at a young age. At the end of that game, the main villain chastises the protagonist, saying that he, quote, lacked the qualifications to exercise free will. That insult planted a sort of seed within me, mainly because I realized that that insult was equally applicable to myself, on account of my lackluster education up until that point. Discontented, I desperately sought out other works of art that would provide me with the same enlightenment that Metal Gear Solid 2 did, and again, that came mostly from video games. Granted, video games are not a sufficient, all-encompassing replacement for traditional educational models, but they should certainly be one of many tools to stimulate a love of learning and a capacity for rational thinking. Today, I want to celebrate the top 10 games that I believe contain both the most philosophical content and also do the most to birth one's inner philosopher. The games that inspire one's love for and one's pursuit of wisdom. Before I get to that, I want to mention that I put this list together with a friend of mine named Arcane, who is currently studying philosophy in university. He not only helped with the ordering of the games and the arguments in favor of their placement, but also put together a basic tool to demonstrate a game's philosophical quantity. He chose 4 different categories of philosophy and gave each game a 0 through 5 score based on how much each category is represented. Both his and my score will be put in the bottom right corner of the screen at the beginning of each entry. Finally, I have 6 honorable mentions. First is Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 2 for its Nietzschean themes, particularly with the character of Kreia. Second is Final Fantasy IX, which I believe has the best examination of the fate versus free will dichotomy in the entire FF series. As for the other 4 honorable mentions, they are not singular games but entire series. The Metal Gear Solid series, the Legacy of Kain series, the Dark Souls series, and any game that has the prefix Xeno. I do not believe that any single game in any of these series merited a place in the top 10, but as collective wholes, they taught me more than I ever learned in a classroom. Now, with that out of the way, I will now count down what I believe are the top 10 most philosophical video games ever made. Number 10, Outer Wilds. Certainly the most unique game on this list, Outer Wilds tasks the player with uncovering the history of an ancient civilization of aliens. To do this, you must travel on your spaceship to a variety of different planets, seek out ancient ruins, and uncover artifacts. In any other game, this would amount to a variety of basic fetch quests, but Outer Wilds provides a couple of unique twists to that formula. First, you can only explore the solar system in 22-minute intervals. When that time is passed, the sun goes supernova and you die. Except moments later, you wake back up with all your memories from your previous loops intact. Second, the game doesn't provide you with quest markers clearly telling you where to go. Instead, you must rely on your own ingenuity to figure out where to go based on the information you have gathered, and how best to do so within the time limit. Eventually, you find out what happened to the ancient aliens, and without spoilers, the realization invokes feelings of deep existential dread. Dread whose potency is amplified by the constant reminder that you're going to die. thankfully, by trusting the player to find their own way, by encouraging the player to think for themselves. Outer Wilds covertly conditions the player to strengthen their philosophical capability, which in turn enables them to cope with the game's heavy existentialism. Number 9. Bioshock. In an era of increasing political polarization, it has become increasingly difficult to find a piece of media that will examine opposing philosophies in a calm and unbiased way. The last place some might expect to find this type of examination is in a first-person shooter game, and yet, Bioshock did just that. Now, some might push back on my claim that Bioshock is unbiased, because it is clearly a critique of right-wing objectivism, an ideology that preaches faith in capitalism and moral selfishness. While this is true, I argue that that is only one part, as well as the most obvious part, of Bioshock's sophisticated political fable. The game also gives objectivism positive marks. For example, the game's chief exponent of objectivism, Andrew Ryan, built the magnificent underwater city of Rapture, and that city flourished on the basis of that ideology, but only for a while. Then the positives and negatives of objectivism are contrasted with those of its opposite, altruism, whose main exponent is the game's secondary antagonist, Frank Fontaine. Through cutscenes and lore documents, Bioshock makes the player contend with the virtues and deficits of both ideologies, and enables them to come to their own conclusions about what is right and wrong. Number 8. SOMA. The story of SOMA follows a man named Simon Jarrett, who recently suffered a serious brain injury from a car accident. Unfortunately, his injuries were so serious that conventional medical intervention would not suffice, which gave him a short time to live. Due to this, Simon decides to undergo an experimental brain scan in the hopes that it might enable some type of treatment. In the process of being scanned, Simon blacks out and wakes up 100 years in the future, in an underwater research station known as Pathos 2. The world above has been devastated by a comet, supposedly rendering him and any other potential survivors aboard Pathos 2 the last remaining humans. But as he quickly finds out, many of the people trying to communicate with him are less human than one might initially believe. Now, out of all the games on this list, SOMA arguably delivers the strongest emotional gut punch with its philosophy. And it does so primarily by asking one simple question. What are the consequences of replicating human consciousness using AI? In other words, what if you could create an artificial copy of your mind? What follows from this question are a variety of other discomforting questions. Should this AI be considered truly alive? Does this AI copy deserve the same rights and protections that I do? Who is the true me? Is it the original me? What if I believe in God and an afterlife? Do those concepts apply to artificial consciousness? Unlike all the other games on this list, which offer potential solutions to these philosophical questions, SOMA invites you to stew in the dread and confusion that these questions produce. So, yeah, good luck. Number 7. Fallout New Vegas. When the entire world has been blown to bits by nukes, the likelihood your pre-existing moral code will remain intact decreases exponentially. While all of the Fallout games do a solid job showing how slippery human morality can be, none of them reach the standard set by Fallout New Vegas, and this is primarily due to the game's hefty injection of philosophy. While said philosophy is delivered in the expected ways, such as impassioned monologues by faction leaders on the virtues of egalitarianism, capitalism, or democracy, the game's true genius lies with how it involves the player in that philosophical discourse, specifically through its intricately designed dialogue trees. Every conversation you have with the game's important NPCs has moral consequences, often in ways you cannot perceive. This means you will have to think long and hard about what you truly believe in, if you're willing to stand by your beliefs to the bitter end, or if you're willing to bend them for convenience. As a consequence of these tests, gamers tend to develop intense loyalties to certain philosophies that this game espouses. Seriously, Of all the fiery video game debates I've observed in my life, Xbox or PlayStation, Tifa or Aerith, very few have reached the philosophical intensity produced by Fallout New Vegas. Specifically, which of the game's main factions is the most moral? Although, frankly, the question should be which is the least sinful, because they all have a lot of problems. When fans are still having rigorous debates over the philosophies of these factions, over a decade later, then you know that this game did something right. Number 6. Deus Ex. Of all the big problems that the world faces today, arguably the biggest one is misinformation facilitated by the internet and social media. After all, if you can't separate fact from fiction, how can you accurately diagnose and fix any other problem? Unfortunately, we do not yet have a concrete solution to this problem. But we do have Deus Ex, a game which speculates on a variety of potential solutions to the problem of misinformation, as well as their potential repercussions. Should there be increased regulation of information? Can the masses be trusted to discern the truth? If the answer to both is no, maybe the only way out is to augment the human brain, and make it powerful enough to discern what is right and wrong. Deus Ex showcases a frighteningly familiar world where shadowy organizations are fighting over how to address this very problem. And you, along with the public at large, are caught in the literal and ideological crossfire. Thankfully, both the story and the gameplay are structured in such a way to empower the gamer, to give them the maximum amount of choice regarding how to deal with these problems, be it through the way you approach a mission, or dialogue choices with relevant NPCs. It does this so well that I believe anybody concerned with the problem of misinformation and where it might take us should absolutely play Deus Ex. That way, they can get a well-rounded, unbiased education and determine potential solutions for themselves. Number 5. The Talos Principle. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the story of Adam and Eve from the Bible, where the first 2 humans to ever live are told by God not to eat fruit from a certain tree, because it would grant them knowledge of good and evil. But then the devil comes along and tempts them to do it anyway. Now imagine that story as if it were a puzzle game with a science fiction aesthetic. The first humans are robots, the devil talks to you through a computer, and it's actually good if you disobey God, apparently. That's what the Talos Principle is in a nutshell. Yeah, I know on the surface it sounds ridiculous, but make no mistake, this game is in the running for the most underrated game of all time. Not only is the gameplay close to the polish and mind-bending nature of the Portal franchise, its story and philosophy share the same qualities. Just as the game encourages you to look at a puzzle from a number of different angles to solve it, the same can be said about its moral quandaries. To use the Adam and Eve example, one character in the Talos Principle makes a compelling argument that maybe God wanted Adam and Eve to eat the fruit in the first place. If they didn't, then their obedience to God wouldn't be out of choice, but out of slavishness. To truly love God would be to know good and evil, and choose good, choose God. This is just one of a number of mind-bending questions that this game poses to you, and leaves you to contemplate while you're solving increasingly difficult puzzles. By the time the game is done, you will feel intellectually exhausted, but you will also feel more intellectually rewarded than you have for most of your entire life. Number 4. Pathologic 2. In Pathologic 2, you play as Artemi Barak, a surgeon who just arrived back to his hometown after his father wrote to him, asking him to come home. Upon your return, you quickly discover that your father has been murdered. But before you can properly investigate what happened, a vicious, deadly plague breaks out. You are then tasked with discovering a cure for the plague and treating the sick as people begin to die all around you, which by proxy makes the town descend into lawlessness. This means you will have to make unconscionably tough decisions, like who you want to prioritize keeping alive over others, because you will not have enough time or resources to treat everyone. In fact, you will likely struggle to even keep yourself alive as you are faced with a variety of moral dilemmas. Is it alright to sell people's organs who died in order to keep yourself fed as you continue to work? Should you rob people as the town collapses in order to steal what you need to keep working and survive? To what degree should finding your father's killer take priority over treating more people? As you struggle to figure out what the right thing to do is, you may be faced with the seeming absurdity of the situation. Why are you even alive in such a cruel, random world to begin with? Why do we even get up in the morning? Your answers to these existential questions, along with your moral decisions, will end up determining which ending you will get as you play out the story. So yeah, if you decide to play Pathologic 2, good luck trying to have fun with this, let's say, playable Russian literature. Yeah, let's go with that. Number 3, Nier Automata. To properly set up this entry, I need to cite the 19th century German philosopher, Friedrich Nietzsche. He made what I believe is the most significant philosophical statement of the last 2 centuries. God is dead and we have killed him. A diagnosis that emerged out of Enlightenment philosophy and its powerful critiques of religion. Though atheists sometimes view Nietzsche's proclamation as a positive thing due to his fervent atheism, the reality is that Nietzsche thought the decreasing legitimacy of religion in Europe would cause European culture to tumble into violent nihilism and totalitarianism. This is because, if there is no final reward or meaning to the struggles of life, then what is to stop a human being from being corrupted by life's suffering? Providing an answer to that question is something that philosophers continue to struggle with to this day, and is the central focus of Nier Automata's story. But it does many things to frame that question in a variety of new and interesting ways. First, it couches that question not in the 21st century, but tens of thousands of years in the future, following a post-apocalyptic event. Nier's version of the future is a world where humans aren't the ones struggling with Nietzsche's conundrum, but instead robots and androids. For beings that almost certainly won't go to heaven upon death, how do they not give into feelings of violent resentment? What with the immense suffering happening around them. Though Nier Automata does attempt to provide a variety of solutions to this problem, all of those potential solutions are met with the most brutal of challenges. But fret not, the game does affirm and celebrate life, despite its suffering. And that appreciation of life is made all the stronger for having contended with that philosophical struggle. Number 2, Disco Elysium. For decades, CRPG fans have dreamed of a video game that could mimic the spontaneity, immersion, and reactiveness of the tabletop experience. Disco Elysium set the standard in that regard, creating what I believe is one of, if not the, most immersive games I've ever played. And best of all, the immersiveness of its intricately woven dialogue systems and mission design are used to foster a series of constant philosophical dilemmas, which will not end until you see the credits roll. In the game's post-war and poverty-stricken world of Elysium, you are constantly encountering people being driven to political extremes, including the character you play as. To complete a mission in Disco Elysium, you often have to contend with a variety of people whose views you will find appalling. Though ideally you would want to complete a mission by convincing someone of your philosophy's superiority, Disco Elysium imitates real life in that doing so is, at best, very difficult. Therefore, you will often have to, begrudgingly, consider a variety of subversive tactics and deception, which carry their own moral implications. Granted, it is possible to play the game morally despite the difficulty. When you complete a mission and are able to do so without compromising your moral principles, the feeling of vindication is unlike anything I've ever experienced playing a video game. It's the realization that you can be a beacon of light to others in a world as bleak as Elysium, solely from your philosophical ingenuity. And it will inspire you, just as it inspires me to want to do the same thing in real life. Number 1. Planescape Torment. Planescape Torment is the video game equivalent of a 4-year undergraduate degree at a prestigious university, and I say that while doing my best to temper any hint of exaggeration. The world, story, and gameplay of Planescape were crafted specifically so that they could deliver the greatest quantity and quality of philosophy, with a level of clarity that you will almost never get in an academic setting. The game takes place in a dimension known as the Outer Planes, a series of afterlives that one can go to upon death, depending on how morally one acted in their past life. You play a character known as the Nameless One. He wakes up inside a mortuary with no memory of who he was or how he got there. Though the Nameless One aims to recover his lost identity, he finds this increasingly difficult as he interacts with the game's 15 ideologically motivated factions, ranging from the Nihilist Dustmen, to the Religious Godsmen, to the Anarchist Revolutionary League. The influence of their ideas and your personal adherence to them slowly displace the Nameless One's own identity with that of the player, which inevitably invokes disturbing questions about the nature of one's self. Throughout the game, you and the Nameless One will not only contend with this displaced sense of self, but with these 15 factions whose ideas are influencing your new identity. Ideally, like with Disco Elysium, you will complete missions in a way that is consistent with your values, and in doing so, you will validate Planescape Torment's central message: the strength of the human will to adhere to one's belief, to one's philosophy, can be so strong that it can maybe do the impossible, including change the very nature of a man. And that's my list. Do you agree with my picks? Were there any games I missed? Let me know in the comments section below. Make sure to hit that like button if you liked the video. It's quick, free, and easy to do. Special thanks to Arcane once again for helping me put this video together, as well as writing the majority of the entry for Pathologic 2. And special thanks to Indy once again for helping me edit the video. Until next time, remember to stay safe and stay yellow.